Hi there everybody, so I wanted to put together a really quick tutorial video on the principles of motion design um, After Effects version of the assignment. I want to try and make this as quickly as possible and yet as detailed as possible, so it's a bit contradictory, so we'll end up with a medium amount of time that we'll be talking about things. What I have here playing in the background is the example versions of the compositions that I put together of what we'll be making today. So let's just jump right into it. So what we'll be doing first is making a brand new composition. So there's 4 places to do that. That's right here, create new composition. You can right click on an empty area of the project panel here, or you can go to composition, new composition, or use a shortcut key Control N. Start off by naming our composition. So this is going to be the impact scene is what we're going to start with. I use the preset 1920 1080 24. You just do that by clicking here and selecting that one. A duration of 10 seconds should be pretty good. It's going to be more time than we'll need, but it's better to have more time than you'll need so you can easily cut it down than it is to be coming into the composition settings and adding time. And then lastly, we have the background color down here. This background color does not show up in your render. All it's meant to do is be there to add some contrast to the viewer so that you can see what you're working on. So I'm going to be using a bunch of light colors. So black background will help me out. If you are going to be using dark colors for yours, then maybe adding a white background will work better for you. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now we got our new composition. Cool. Let's start off by figuring out how to draw shapes. So up here we have the tool panel. We have our selection tools here, 3D navigation. We have our, I guess, transform tools. This is the anchor point transform and the rotation transform. And then we have our drawing tools here. These are what we're going to need. So we have the text, the pen tool, and the rectangle tool. If I press and hold this and then release, then it'll keep this menu open and I can select what I want. Or if I press and hold and then do not release the mouse and only release it once I'm over the tool I want, it'll then do that. So I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool to draw our hammer. So click and drag will draw out the shape. If you've used Illustrator, this is familiar. Shift will constrain it to proportional, so there's a square. And holding down space will let you readjust the position of what you're drawing. So I'm going to use all of these things I talked about a second ago to just position this, I don't know, somewhat like that. I'm going to end up readjusting everything with numbers in a little bit just because that's how I like doing things. If you don't, just draw it out and place it. So now that I've got my shape, I have some things to worry about. What color do I want it to be? And where can I find the places to add a stroke, get rid of a stroke, or to change the color. So I have 2 places. I have this up here. This is my stroke and fill. If I click on this, I can change what kind of fill, or over here I can change the kind of stroke. If this is already set to solid color, you'll want to come in and turn it off over here. The other place that we can adjust this is over here in the new properties panel. If you are in After Effects 2023, you can just change this from none to solid or solid to none, whatever you need, and you can select the color here or use the eyedropper tool if you have something somewhere that you can grab your colors from. So we got that. Next thing's next. Let's make the handle. So I'm going to just rough it out because I have some possible numbers I want to put in. I'm going to just guesstimate some. So the enter key is after you select a property or layer, you can rename it using the enter key. And so I'm going to name this hammer. Select the next thing here. I believe this is, yep, the handle. Enter handle. Enter hammer. And then I personally like to adjust all the stuff. Don't use that. Unlink this. 20, maybe 300. Yeah, I'll just round those off. Come down to the hammer, do the same thing. let's say, I don't know, 250 by 175? That's kind of small. Maybe 300? Yeah, that's fine. And then next things next, I'm going to close this up, and let's use the transforms here. So I want to center this just in case. So I'm going to 0 tab 0. Do the same thing to the other transform down here, 0 tab 0. And then I'm going to adjust my position of my handle to be higher. Let's go with that. Cool. Maybe negative 205, doesn't matter. Cool. Now I need to make some adjustments to the anchor point. So just in case, this is a shortcut key I use all the time. If I hold down Control and collapse this, when I open it up, everything else will be collapsed. Or if I hold down Control and hit this button, it'll open everything up. So Control, that works out. Cool, so now the next thing we need to adjust, like we talked about earlier, we got the anchor point tool. So I want to select the layer, and now that everything's collapsed, I know that I have this selected. If everything isn't collapsed and I have something like the handle selected, this will be not visible here. So I want to make sure that what is selected is the layer up here. And so collapsing that helps me do that. Zooming in and out here in the viewer, you can just scroll in and out, or you can use Control plus and minus, or comma and period will also zoom in and out. Space key will let you pan, or if you're using a mouse, middle mouse button, when you click on it and drag, will let you pan as well. So these are all helping me get closer in so that I can position my anchor point really well. When I move the anchor point, I can move it freely, or if I hold down Control, it will snap me to some different points. So here is the center of this, here is the center of this. We have center lines for each of these things. But I want to snap mine center to this, and I'm zooming in to place it into this imaginary circle here that I have at the end of this rounded rectangle. So that looks good. It doesn't need to be perfect, but at least close. Cool, so that's out of the way. Next, I need a ball. Press and hold, get me to the ellipse tool, drag, shift, and make it about the size I want it to be. Something important to keep in mind is if I had this hammer layer selected and I started drawing it, it adds it to that layer. So I want to make sure that I have nothing selected when I draw that shape. So I can either select an empty, click down on an empty portion of the dope sheet, which is this down here, or to use the, if I have this completely full and I'm drawing, I want to use the shortcut key Control-Shift-A will deselect everything. So there's that. So shift, drag it out. And I told you I like round numbers, so I can just come in here and I think 150 is fine. And do that, but remember, you don't have to do it. It's just personal preference. So I'm going to go ahead and position these right within this realm. And you can see here I have this guide on mine that maybe you might not have. What that is the title action safe, which is down here. This is the viewer panel. At the bottom of the viewer panel, we have some options for what we're seeing. So I can turn on and off the title action safe. If I hover over this, it tells you the shortcut key is Alt click. We'll turn that on and off. What the title action safe is a guideline for setting what your actions are. Sorry, I had to step away for a second. So title action safe, what that is a guide for placing your actions and the words that will be happening on your screen so that they won't get cut off on other screens. Because as you know, not every phone is the exact same size, and maybe they're not watching on their phone, maybe they're watching on a computer monitor, or they're watching on their TV somewhere where the proportions can't be adjusted. So there's a possibility your work could get cut off, and then, you know, nobody will see that cool thing that you wanted them to. So placing this within the title action safe helps out. take the ball and position it not too close. I don't want it to be touching just because I want to have room for creating an anticipation animation to this. So we got our supposition. Cool. We're going to start off by making the light impact first. And then from there, we'll move on to the heavy impact by duplicating what we've already done and then making adjustments. So here I have the, I want to make sure I name my ball just in case. So I have the ball, I have the hammer. It's better to start off with the hammer for this one and then using the impact point of the hammer to then decide when the ball will take off. So first things first, hammer, using the rotation property by using the R key to give us rotation. I'm going to then come to the very beginning of the timeline and keyframe it. This is where we start. I'm going to move ahead maybe 6 frames, so this is 1/4 of a second. And I have 2 ways to rotate this. One is I can just hover over this and drag it, right? I can change the number, give me a number I like, or I can use this transform tool we were talking about earlier, which is the rotation tool, and I can drag it that way, right? Those are the different ways I can do that. I can do this and get an approximate location and then change these numbers, whatever works best, right? So I want, say, -3. I'm going to take the ball, so I'm using the selection tool and just put it slightly closer. So I know I got room for that. Cool beans. Sorry, I'm a little bit congested. And I'm going to move ahead to the 1 second frame, and I'm going to move this back. So this is going towards the positive direction, and move it to somewhere, let's say almost off the screen. Let's say +75, right? And then maybe even further. Let's go with like 95, right? So all the way off the screen, we're really winding it up. And then it's going to come swinging down half a second later, which is 12 frames, right? So 12 frames, because we're working at 24 frames per second. So next things next, let's go all the way to the opposite side, but we're going to lose some momentum. So let's say -75 looks good. Now maybe go forward to 2 seconds, and I'm going to do +55, -35, and I don't know if you're noticing a pattern here, but I've done +95, -75, +55. The difference between these is about 20 degrees and switching positive negative, right? And so I'm just slowly lowering this number down. So next is +15, maybe -5, and 0. That way we come all the way down. So we're slowly losing power, right? Bam, 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 bam. But you can see this looks a little funky still. And why is that? That's because we don't have any easing. So easing is how, I guess, fast in or out the keyframes go. So this is telling the program, you know, how close together to draw the frames or far apart to draw the frames to imitate speed. And so we're going to ease these keyframes first to at least get us the handles that we want. There are a few different ways to do this. You select all the keyframes, right click keyframe assistant, easy ease. The other way is to use the shortcut key that was listed there, which was F9, right? So right click on the keyframe, keyframe assistant, F9. The other way is to come to the graph editor, you select the value, and that will then select all those keyframes. If it's not selected, you need to select it first and then click it again one more time to select all those keyframes, and then easy ease here, right? So this is the button for that, ease in, ease out, easy ease. Now we're going to make some adjustments to those handles, right? This is pretty great, this pendulum swing. It already gets us pretty close to what we want to be. Bam, bam. Right? But maybe I want it to hang just a little bit longer at all of these high points. So what I can do is if I need to do multiple at a time, I can draw a bounding box over them. Shift, if it's already selected, will take it out or add it in to your selection. I can make just a very minor adjustment to just stretch it out just a little. And I want to make sure I'm holding down shift when I adjust this so that I know that it doesn't go up or down. It only comes straight out, right? Because if I don't, then it can break the handles if they're already broken. Uh, so just a minor adjustment out, holding down shift. And let's see how that looks. Maybe a little less. So select all those, drag it just a smidge in. Yeah, I like that. And then maybe, so I'm zooming in. On the timeline, you hold down Alt and scroll in and out, and that'll zoom you in on your graph editor as well as this timeline down here. So in case you need to be really close to those keyframes. Another one is, I think it's a, no, I don't remember that shortcut, but that's fine. Yeah, so Alt scrolling in and out. Zoom in on that, and I just want to hold down shift and drag this towards this keyframe a little just so that it settles a little slower when it comes to the end. Cool. All right, that's settled. Now something that I want to make sure is what keyframe is my impact happening on, right? So is it here or here? And something I can see is that I don't have an exact frame that happens on. It goes past it or it's on it. And so I can either choose from one of these two and just have it be that way. But what I like to do is I'm going to pull on this handle here, holding down shift, and I'm going to just adjust it, let's see, until, so I'm going to adjust both of these on either side until my hammer lines up on one of these frames. So I think, so I'm going to go to 107 and just pull on this and pull on this. And I'm just pulling them in and out until I get this lined up where I want it to be. So that way I know I have an exact keyframe where this impact happens. And then I want to play it through to make sure this still looks good. Yeah, still looks good. Now I can come to that keyframe I said, which was 107, and come to the ball, P for position. Now my dimensions are already separated, but if yours aren't, you select position, right click, separate dimensions. And then I want to select only the X position and keyframe that one. I don't want to keyframe my Y position. So I want to make sure it's not selected. So I just deselected by selecting down here and then clicked at that one. And then let's say it only takes, let's go to 2 seconds and then drag this out. Or using the selection tool, I can click on it, hold down shift to drag in one direction and get it completely off the screen. So bang, and it flies off the screen. Cool. But it looks kind of robotic. It's like really linear. And what might really happen when these impact, when I think about it, is that the hammer will hit the ball and all the force will be transferred to the ball, so it'll go really quickly. But over time, it'll lose force because of, you know, the wind causing friction, rolling on the floor causes friction, and gravity will be pulling it down to slow it down as well. So I need to ease these as well, right? So keyframe assistant, easy ease, that's one way of doing it. Use a shortcut key. Now, I didn't talk about this in the pendulum swing one just because it's a little bit more of a complicated graph, but I'm going to talk about it in this one because it's a much more simple between two keyframes graph. We're going to talk about how does the slope of the curves, I guess, affect the speed in our curves graph editor. So if you think about math, right? If you have a graph like this that goes from 500 to 2000, or you know, even if it was 0 to 2000, right? And you have 2 points on this graph. Let's say these, instead of representing frames, represent seconds. If you had, like, you walked across a room over a course of a frame, right? So let's say 2,000 feet of a room over the course of 1 second is going to be, a really steep line. Whereas if I did that exact same distance over the course of 5 seconds, it's a really shallow line. And so that's a much slower transition. So shallow means slow, steep means fast. This is the amount of change over the time that's happening. Rate time, right? Or value change time, right? So if I make this steeper on this end, right, then we have fast, slow. So this would be fast in, slow out, right? Yeah, and we can see that as well here. This is how the program is drawing those frames. We can see these little dots here, right? So the beginning one, there's one tween, the next tween, the next tween. And so that tells you, really fast change or really slow change because the keyframes are all real close together. So we're moving just a tiny step each frame there, right? So bang, off the screen we go. And if I want this to happen just like a little faster at the end, I would just pull in this handle there, right? And then it comes off the screen faster. All right, so I got the light impact done. Now, how do I do the heavy impact? So I'm going to select both layers, Control D for duplicate, right? And then I'm going to grab one of these layers since they're already selected and drag it down. So now they're right next to each other. Sorry, one sec. All right, I'm back. All right, so we had these two layers selected and we moved them down. And then now we got to get to renaming our layers real quick, right? So Enter key will let me, once I select a layer, rename it like we talked about earlier. The back arrow key will let me go to the beginning of what's highlighted. And I'm going to name that light bulb. Enter. Control down or up lets me toggle between the layers. Back arrow key, light hammer. And so you just continue doing that. I'm going to go forward arrow key and then go all the way back to the beginning. This is heavy. Cool, got those renamed. Now I'm going to select both the heavy ball and the heavy hammer. I'm going to hit the U key. U will show me what my keyframes are. And I want to hover over, I want to move my playhead over this first position change for the ball. This is just so that when I move the position of my layers, it won't create a keyframe. And I'll show this right now. If I'm not hovering over one and I shift change, you see now I have a keyframe on that X position, even though I didn't change the X position. So hover over a keyframe, drag it down, hold down shift so I don't change anything about the X position, and just position that somewhere that I might like. To keep it safe, I'm gonna keep it within this one, and I can shift or drag these up a little. So drag, select, drag up, shift. So I want to make sure to drag first and then hold down shift. That is something to keep in mind. If I hold down shift before dragging, it won't move, right? So move, then shift. Just something to keep in mind. All right, so now I got two identical actions. Now, what might make the heavy ball seem heavier? Well, one would be that it would go off of the screen much slower because the force might not have been enough to move it, and it's going to slow down much faster as well because it's much heavier. Gravity is working on it much stronger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this end keyframe and just drag it all the way out to 4 seconds, sorry. And now it's off the screen. But we notice here that these tweening frames I had here are really far apart still. That means it's going really fast off the screen. Why is that? Well, if I go into my graph editor, I can see that because of the easing I did earlier, my handle for some reason got longer. And so I'm going to just drag it down. Once I let it go, it'll zoom in, and that has to do with this button right here, auto zoom graph height. And I'm going to just drag this down, and I'm going to kind of just slope it a little here, so that way it looks like that. And so here we see that we got these nice close keyframes here, and it's real slow at the end. So bang, really slow off the screen. Cool. All right, we got that. Next is our heavy hammer. So we know that we have this impact area that we had right here. And another reason that I wanted to make sure that this keyframe lined up here was so that I can also be able to make these adjustments without worrying. So if I click this button here, this will create a keyframe at that point in time, and it'll keep the curves in mind as well. So I got this nice and keyframed right there. And next thing I want is I want this to bounce backwards, right? So we knew that the backswing was positive earlier, right? So I want to find the next positive keyframe. This one's negative, this one's positive, right? So I'm going to get rid of that negative one, and I want the positive one to be next. And then I'm going to drag these a little bit closer. Maybe not exactly, but I do want it to be kind of even to the opposite side there. So nice even separation there. And then let's see, did this work? So comes through. Nope, it kind of does a full swing through and then it comes back, right? Why is that? So in our graph editor, we noticed earlier when we moved the ball, it kind of messed with it. So why not here? Same thing, it messes with it. So we see here we get some overshoot and then it comes back up. So it's trying to keep that pendulum swing motion. What I want to do is I want this to do a bounce, right? So I want it to impact and snap back. This is a sudden change, right? Bam. So I want to make this impact curve like we would for a bouncing ball. If your handles aren't broken, using the Alt key will break them, or in my case, it's going to put them back together. But mine were already broken, so moving that up, and I get this nice bounce. Let's see what that looks like. Bounces off the ball, and then continues the swing the way that I set those keyframes earlier. Bang. Looks good. Cool. All right. Next thing next, we are going to make some text that's going to appear in the back of this. So if you already chose your text, great. If you didn't, then you can always change this later. I chose, I believe, impact, maybe, which is, you know, unexpected. Impact is one that they have in here. I'm going to use that font. And if it didn't do it, like in my case, it's because one, I didn't have this selected this way. I could also come out of that and select it this way. Same thing. Impact. There we go. I'm going to use that as my font. Make it bigger and place it somewhere that makes sense. If I want to perfectly center it, what I can do is if I scroll, let's see, down, I have this align panel. If yours isn't already there, window align will bring that up for you. So I'm going to perfectly center that there, and then maybe center it this way, and then just give me a position. So let's go with that. Cool. Bam. I might want to change the color of my text, so I can scroll up here, get my fill, and I'm going to make it just slightly darker. There we go. That's fine. That way it's not like brighter than the sun at me. Cool. I got that set. I have my colors that I want, and we're looking good. All right. So one thing we can do is we can add some motion blur to all of our moving objects like that. Now we got a little bit of motion blur, and that does look better. But additionally, I'd like to add an effect that will, I guess, help out with making this look better. So I'm going to move my text all the way down to the bottom. And I'm going to make something called, so I'm going to right click, new. I can do it here as well, or up here, layer new. This is how you make a new thing. we have a lot of useful things. So I'm going to use the adjustment layer. And what this is it's basically like a filter, right? So enter, I'm going to name this filters so I know that that's what it's doing. And the reason that this is an invisible layer is because of this button right here, adjustment layer. And if I hover over it, it'll tell me what it does. Effects applied to this layer apply to the composite of layers below. So any effect I throw on this will affect everything below it. So I want to use that for echo. So over here we got the effects and presets panel and time echo. I can drag that to my adjustment layer. And we're already seeing something happening. We got like a little ghost of a shadow right behind it, right? And so how many echoes is this number of echoes one? I'm going to say like 10. So now we see we got that happening. And then they're really far apart, and that has to do with the echo time. How, I guess, delayed is each echo, right? So this is, I think, I don't even know the math for that, but it's a fraction of a second. So I want something like 0.003. And that just delays it just a little and smears it, right? So, bang. That doesn't look so bad. Now, everything looks super bright, and that has to do with the echo operator here. We're going to change it from add to, I'm going to say composite in back. So, bam. Looks good. And then something I like to do is T for opacity. And then just turn down the opacity of that a little so that when it goes through, it's not perfectly the same color as the other one. We can see the smearing happening. Yeah, looks good. All right, that looks good. Now I'm gonna hit U on the keyboard. We know that our time goes really long and nothing's happening over here. So how do we cut down the time of our composition? So we have some shortcuts to remember for this. There is B for beginning, N as a nose for end, and this will set the beginning and end of your work area, which is this bar up here, right? This bar is your work area. If I shorten it this way and hold down Shift, it'll snap it that way, or I can use the shortcut key N, right? As long as my timeline, so if I move my playhead and hit N, it's going to move it to wherever the playhead is at. So doing that, making sure it's at this keyframe here, and I can make sure it's at there. If I hold down Shift, it'll snap me to keyframes. So Shift, snap it, N, and now this is my work area. If I right-click the work area, I can trim comp to work area. Now I don't want to make sure, like I want to make sure I click on specifically that thing I'm wanting to trim to, right? So that, trim comp to work area. Or I can use the shortcut key Control-Shift-X, which is basically like cut my time. Control-Shift-X. Cool, so we got that cut down, we got the effect we wanted, we can turn on the motion blur as well later on with this additionally, so that way we don't need it on the impact. Let it cache those frames real quick. We can see what it looks like. This is going to be a little bit heavy, so if you're noticing it's going really slow for you, you can always turn off the motion blur until you go to render. That way, while you're working, things are going faster, and then when you go to render, you can turn it on and it can do all that calculation. So for the time being, I'm going to turn mine off. I'll turn it on later, just for efficiency's sake. And we can see here, I now have this effects control panel, and I can't see my project panel. And so what can I do to see my project panel? Again, I can click on it over here, or I can click on these double arrows and go to project. Now I got my project panel back. Now we're going to move on to our next scene, which is bounce, right? So I can create a composition of that. This is bounce. And then we can do the standard 10 seconds we had earlier. Hit OK, because all these settings should be the same. And what if I want a ball that is the same size as the ball in my impact scene. What can I do? I can just click on the light ball, control copy, come over to the bounce scene, and paste. So I've copied and pasted it, but it's got keyframes on it, one, and it's shorter than I need. So I can drag out the end of this. When I hover over it, I got double arrows. Drag it out, hold down shift to snap it to the end. U for show me my keyframes, and just click on the stopwatch to get rid of those keyframes. And I can use that align panel I had earlier to center it. But in my case, I don't necessarily want the exact same thing. But it doesn't hurt. So what I want is to make this bigger because I don't need an ellipse that small. Let's say that's a bit big. 200? Yeah, 200 is fine. All right, so I got that. Time to position it somewhere. And so I'm going to use my proportional grid because I set it up to look like a thirds grid. And I'm going to just, let's say, place that there. And back to my title action safe, line it up with this line down here. Yeah, well, you don't know. I'm going to just put it out here. That's fine. Okay, cool. Got that. Now to take my other one, or I guess to make another ball, right? So I'm going to control D, drag it out, rename it, heavy ball. And I can also use this title action save to get me symmetrical. Cool. I got a light and a heavy ball. And this setup looks pretty similar to what I'm going to do for the squash and stretch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the project panel, select my bounce composition. I'm going to hit Control D and then enter and rename that to squash and stretch. And then go into that squash and stretch one and rename these simple and path, because I know that's what I'm going to do with those later. So now I can come back to the bounce comp, which is over our timeline. We have all these compositions open. We can switch between them using this. So I'm going to come back to the bounce one and get started with our bounces. So I'm going to, let's see. In this case, I have the light ball and the heavy ball in opposite sides. Let's just rename them. All right. Light, ball, enter. Control down, enter. Heavy ball, just because I know I want these to be on those particular sides. Okay, cool. All right. Now to make the bouncing happen. So what can I do? Start off by setting some keyframes. So P for position. My dimensions are separated. I want the Y position because we're going up and down in this case. And maybe we'll start from up above. So I'll just go to, let's say 12 frames, I guess. Let's say it takes that long to land. So I'm going to keyframe that there. Come to the beginning and then move it up. And I'll hold down shift while I move it up. So let's say we drop from this height 245, land at my 874 because that's where I had it. And then it's going to bounce back up. So how high will it bounce back up? Let's say about 2/3 of the way back up. Then it'll come back down. So I can just copy paste this floor keyframe that I had here earlier, right? So we got a down, up, down, right? And then come back up. So how far up? I said about 2/3 of the way, so I can see my keyframe there. So I can do that. Just position it. Control V to paste my floor keyframe that I copied earlier. And then come back up. Control V to paste my floor keyframe. Come back up a little. Control V to paste, right? So we got all that. Boing, 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 boing. Okay. Now, why does this look weird? Once again, we're on to the easing. Select all of these. I'm going to use the shortcut key F9. Come to my graph editor. And we talked about the fast and slow of things. The steeper it is, the faster it is. And that V shape indicates a sharp change. So when you, punch something, your fist bounces off, right? And so, boing, like that, right? But what I can do is I can even select all of these keyframes at the top up here, right? And I can just do all of them at the same time. And then I can see, the only thing is that these come a little far, right? So I can see that by this going so far there. I can just pull that one up, pull this one up. And then all of these should be a little more shallow because this will be hanging in the air for a little longer. Same for this one keyframe here. Cool, so it hangs in the air, bounce, 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 bounce. And like this one might be too far apart, so maybe drag this in like that. Let's see, oops, accidentally moved my layer. And once again, these should probably come in a little closer. A little too fast. Yeah, good enough. Okay, cool. So that's there. Light bounce. Boing, 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 boing. Right? Now the heavy ball. What I can do for that is I'm just gonna copy my Y position keyframes here and P for position here, select my Y position and just paste that. Right now I got two exact bounces. Boing, 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 right? But I'm gonna get rid of some of these mid keyframes. So here is a bottom impact, and here is an up bounce. So let's say there. So I'm gonna get rid of these here. Drag this back. See how this goes? Yeah, okay. So now we can go into curves, select that Y position, and maybe make this a little lower. So shift, drag it straight up and down. Shift. And something to keep in mind is the time between each whatever is happening. And so a heavy ball would fall faster than a light ball. So maybe moving these more condensed, Alt, and squish them in. But then after squishing them in, I like to wiggle the keyframes a little, just because what can happen, and I can show this if I zoom in, is that you end up with a keyframe not quite lined up with any frames. And so it can make things kind of weird when the frames are being drawn later. So I like to just wiggle them a little to fix that. See what this looks like? Close, but I don't like how long it hangs in the air right here. So let's see, I might hold down Shift and drag in this end, and maybe even Shift drag it up so it doesn't even go that high. And same for this one right here. Maybe drag it up, and I'm using that zooming I showed you earlier, and just taking this and this, dragging that like that. Make this even lower. Yeah, so something like that. See what this looks like. It's still hanging so long in the air there, so maybe, let's see, that, like that. like that. Maybe less time for that to happen, right? So comes back up, and it's happening for so long, so maybe we'll just grab these keyframes here at the end, drag them in. Remember, shift and dragging over something deselects it, so, or adds it to our selection. You can even just click on it as well. So I'm just lessening the time between those frames. So yeah, that's a little better. I do still think that the ends of these bounces are just so shallow. Yeah, I like how sharp this one is compared to the other one. So maybe doing that for these will definitely help. And just lessening the time between them probably would help too. So I can just grab that, shift drag it in. I don't like that it doesn't snap in this view though, so just doing it here. It's just a lot of micro adjustments until things look like you want them to. Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, cool. So bounce is done. I can take the impact that I made earlier, Control C. And you know, I want to make sure this is real quick. I'm going to center text, and then I'm going to center that again. So that way, when I copy, come over to bounce and paste, and then I change the word to bounce, B-O-U-N-C-E, it's centered still. So centering text using that alignment is going to help you with that. So cool, that's done. What else can I do? Well, the echo that I created earlier on the one over here, if I copy that, come over to my bounce and paste that, then I get to use that here as well. Cool. I do need to extend out the time for both of these, maybe? Let's see. You show me how long I got. Yeah, no, instead, let's just stop this at about... I kind of want to stop this before the bouncing is done. So let's say 3 seconds. So I'll do N, Control Shift X, cut that down. Yeah, that's not bad. Cool. Next, we're going to move on to this question stretch. So we're going to do some bouncing in here that's going to happen over and over and over again at the exact same height. There's not really going to be any slowing down because we just want to show the squashing and stretching happening. So I can animate both of these at the same time. P for position, Y position, drag them straight up. Let's see, and then come back to the beginning, have them come down. Let's see. Well, first, let's see. Think about it. Start at 1. How long do I want each bounce to be? Each bounce will be about a second long, so the midpoint will be about 12 frames here. Okay, keyframe the Y position, come to the beginning, drag it up to the top. Something I did not keep in mind. Okay. before anything, so I'm Control-Zing to go back. I want to make sure that my anchor point is at the bottom of this. So remember, Control snaps, right? So it'll snap to even these parts of the bounding box. So I want to snap that to the bottom of that bounding box, snap that to the bottom of that bounding box. Cool. All right, that's better. Grab both Y positions, come to my selection tool, keyframe this position first, go back to the beginning of the timeline, shift and drag it up. All right, cool. I got that down, and I want it to bounce right back to the same position, so I can just copy paste one layer at a time, the keyframes over. So bounce, right? Cool. All right, we got that. I want to just do one single bounce, and then I'm going to, from there, loop that bounce over and over again, or even just loop the keyframes by copy pasting them, whatever works, right? So I want to start with the simple one first. So I'm going to go to, or well, okay, I'm forgetting something. You do a copy paste. I need to make sure that my keyframes down here are eased, right? So easy ease, F9, we talked about the bounce curving, right? So I need this one to be broken, come down, and do a bounce. And I probably need it to hold. So I'm going to just do one at a time so that this makes sense. Because if I do it multiple at a time, it just gets confusing. So I need a hold, right? So I'm going to copy paste this keyframe here and have it hold for a few seconds. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 for 6 seconds, around that. I'm going to get rid of this simple one. We're just going to do one at a time, right? So I have the up position, I have the down position, and then the up position. And these two keyframes here, what I want to happen between them is I want it to be perfectly flat, right? So shift, shift, right? We'll constrain it straight. And then bounce, bounce, hang time in the air, bounce, hold, bounce, right? Cool. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just like with the light and heavy bounce earlier that I did, right? P for position, copy, and paste, so they're the exact same. All right, cool. That's safer. If I need to make any adjustments to the timing, I can just drag this in, right? And it'll hold for less time. All right, cool. Okay, next is the simple squash and stretch. So that would just be scale. I set the anchor point to be at the very bottom of my ball. When it's up in the air, it's gonna be simple. When it hits the ground, it needs to squash down, right? And so I'm gonna set the scale to here, here, so another keyframe there, and right in the middle, it's going to be, so we're going to think about mass, right? When you squish a piece of slime, it doesn't suddenly become smaller, it becomes flat, and because the pieces come outwards, right? So I'm going to undo this link here, and I'm going to squish it on the, probably on the Y first, right? So how low do I want this to go? So if I say 80, or depending on, I guess, how stiff I want the ball to look as well. If I want it to look really squishy, then I would do something like 50, right? Decisions. So I'm going to say somewhere in the middle, let's go with 75. But now whatever I took away from this direction, I need to add to this direction. So 125. So that way it comes out as much as it goes down, right? So boing. I say 70, 130. There we go. Okay. Now, when it's in the air, we said it would stay perfectly the same. So I want the same keyframes at the beginning and the end. And then when it's falling through the air, right? So from here to there, I want it to stretch out, right? So maybe 70 width, 130 height, right? So comes down fast. Now the thing is that it instantly starts stretching, so we'll adjust that in a bit. And then bounces up, and then I want that exact same stretching to happen here, right? And I want it to be a little more towards the end of the line, right? Once we get closer to the top, going up. Okay, let's say something like that. All right, we're getting close. Now to ease all of this stuff, right? So I'm gonna ease this by going F9 in my case. And I want to see my position at the same time. So what can I do to make sure that I can see that at the same time? If I hold down, or if I just hit U, right, that'll show me all my keyframes. And then right next to the Y position, there is a little graph next to it, right? A little graph looking symbol. If I select that in my graph editor, it'll show me the Y position at the same time. So I can toggle between that if I want. But I guess in this case I don't, right? I just want to see these keyframes. And what I want to do is, I probably want there to be a smooth transition in the scale. So I'm going to just select, let's see, not move them. I guess deselect everything. Select just this keyframe right now, for now. And let's see, so this is adjusting that red one. And I'm going to hold down, let's see, well, Alt, yeah. So if I hold down Alt, it'll make sure that the handle isn't broken. So I'm just adjusting based on, there we go. So I want to make sure my handle isn't broken because I want a smooth transition between here to there, here to there. Do the same thing here. And then let's see what this looks like for now. So boing, boing. And then I'm gonna send, for now, I'm gonna hit N for the end of the work area here, so it'll just loop between this one bounce here. So I can just see what this looks like. So yeah, that doesn't look bad. Let's see. I do want this scaling that's happening here to happen a little slower. Or I guess, so yeah, if I want it slower straight out like this, right? See, it doesn't start scaling, bang. And then, let's see, for this, maybe more towards the center, like this. And then maybe drag this one in a little as well. Yeah, so maybe something like that. Boing, 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 boing. Cool. All right, nice. Now let's do the path one. So the path one has to do with inside of this. We looked earlier at the ellipse. In the, I guess in all of these, you saw that I adjusted the size of them here. And so this is a primitive of sorts, meaning that it's just using math to calculate the way that things move. But instead with a path, it's almost like if you drew each point and are able to manipulate them manually, and it's recording each position of each path throughout time, and that's how that's animated. So to turn this into a Bezier path, we just need to select this ellipse path, right click it, and convert to Bezier path. And so now it's got another path, but we don't see too much of a change, right? Because we gotta animate the changes. So this is our point of impact. I'm gonna open up my path and keyframe it, and keyframe it here, so that way I know that it'll be the same there. Keyframe this one and keyframe the other one. Just like we did with this bounce up here, we have it, you know, perfectly circular here, squished perfectly. There we go. Okay. So here, what I'm gonna do is with the path selected here, you can see that this changed a little. I get this little mouse that shows a little box over it that lets me marquee select. So I'm going to select all 3 of those points. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag it down. And then Shift and drag this one down. And then maybe even take these a little further down, like that. And then drag them out. So let me see. Let me think about this. So I'm gonna also I can do it this way where I use the down and up arrow keys, right? So Shift, down, and think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just to kind of, I guess, not have to think about how much I've changed it, right? But I mean, I guess you could manually also just kind of like guesstimate. Like if I pull it down this much, I gotta pull it out this much, and it'll still look like the same volume of ball, hopefully. So that's another way of doing that. So down, and then the next one is the squishing here. So squish this in, squish this in. I'm using Shift to kind of like adjust those things. So when it comes up, right, you would probably see more like streaking at the end here. Maybe bring this in a little more. Select the word path so that I can see that stuff again. Select this one. Maybe I should drag out the handles of this, right? Something like that. Get that bouncing and squishing. Okay, cool. All right. If I want a pretty similar shape here, I could just copy this shape that I made here and paste it over here, and then just make some adjustments. So I can drag this down, drag it in, drag it out. And of course it looks weird. But however you prefer yours to look is up to you. I don't know, I kind of like mine a little less dramatic. But that's fine. So cool. Now, something we're noticing is that right before it gets to the bottom, it's perfectly circular here. So I might not want these keyframes, right? So I'm going to get rid of these 2 perfectly circular keyframes I had there. So that way, once it comes to like almost getting there, so I need to pull this keyframe much further forward. Let's see, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I need a keyframe like this, the squash keyframe. Maybe I need it just a little further forward where this impact happens, and just take these and make a transition between there and there. on the landing, right? So and now same thing for the opposite side, so copy paste. So something like that. Except on this side I might want a little bit flatter out on the end. Let's go with that. So boing, boing, boing. Okay. Now, let's see. So the only thing is that with these particular path animations, there's no way to like ease them into each other. So these are gonna have to stay this way. I mean, you could do easy easing and see how that looks, but I don't know if there's any, like, if it's any better. It's fine. So we've got that. Now, I said we'd talk about looping, so I'm gonna go ahead and zoom this back out. Let's say, how long do we want the bouncing? So if it's gonna be 4 bounces, we need 4 seconds, right? Or if we want it to end at the middle of a bounce, we could do 4.5 seconds. That works too. And N, Control Shift X, we talked about cutting that earlier. We got our bounds, impact. Okay, cool. Just want to make sure they're all cut. So now we got these 4 seconds. Now, as for looping, you can honestly just select these keyframes to copy paste, come to the end, paste, come to the end, paste, come to the end, paste. And now you got it looping. Yeah, that's one way to do it. There is another way to do looping, and copy paste. And so I kind of want to show how to do that for some of you who might want to learn how to be a little bit more efficient in all of this. And so for those of you who don't want to learn, go ahead and skip to the next chapter, which will be putting together the putting together everything into one composition, adding a background and a title. But I'm gonna just Control Z this real quick before skipping ahead, guys. Just for the text, wanted to copy, come to Squash and Stretch, paste, rename this Squash, Enter key, so we get a new line, and Enter key, stretch. Stretch. Okay, cool. Squash and stretch. That's there. Place it at the bottom. All right. Looping. So advanced looping for those of you who want to learn it. Those of you who don't, skip ahead. All right. Advanced looping. We're going to do looping with expressions. To make an expression, you just need to hold down Alt and click on the stopwatch. And now we get this expression window here. And to loop, from, I guess for it to continue afterwards, you just need to type out the word loop and then click on this loop out. And now those keyframes will loop over and over and over again, right? And I can copy this expression, Alt click on the scale, paste it. Now I got the same one there. I can do the same for this position here as well. Now the only thing is that for the path, it's a little different. You can't loop the path animation the same way that you do these scale and position keyframes. So the way you do that is there is an expression that you can use. It's a really simple expression. I do not have it memorized off the top of my head, so I have to just copy paste it from my notes. And I'm going to paste it into the description of this video as well. So if you want to find it, you can go down into the description and copy paste it. I'm just going to copy paste it from the other one that I used here, which is EE, show me my expressions. Let's see, over here. So I'm going to just copy that and take it over to my splash and stretch, alt click and paste it. valueAtTime time %key numKeys dot time. All this does is it basically is saying the value that it is at this particular time of frames, right? Create it'll loop anything between the beginning keyframe and the end keyframe. So the number of keys, right? Based on the number of keys, create a percentage and loop that, right? So now we can see that this loops all the way throughout, even though there's no keyframes over here. Expressions are useful. You don't have to necessarily learn all about them in order to use them. You can learn them slowly as you're going through things, animating things, and you know, they're very beneficial to speeding up your workflow. When you're using these simple ones, you don't have to know everything about them. You can just copy paste them as long as you know kind of what their purpose is and how they work a little bit. So I'm not that advanced at expressions, but I know just a smidge enough to let me be able to do something like this to speed up instead of having to copy paste it. And the benefits of this is if, for example, I want to, you know, slow down my animations. I don't want to see my expressions, so I'm going to just close those up. Oh, right, it's because I hit U. So U twice will show everything you've changed. U once will show you only your keyframes. My bad. So if I slow these things down, say Alt drag it down to halftime, now everything's faster, but it's still looping, and I don't have to go through and manually adjust any other keyframes or grab more keyframes. I can just drag it out or in and make these adjustments as I so desire without any issue. So dragging this back to 1 second here, we got that done. All right, moving on to creating a main comp. So main composition, this will just be, you don't want to name it main. Instead, what you're going to want to name it is your last name, right? So not the word last name, but your last name. In my case, it's Lagrange, right? And then the name of the assignment, so maybe you can just name it motion design, right? So that way when you export this to media encoder, it'll be named the name of this composition, and so the MP4 will also be named this, and you don't have to worry about renaming it, right? But good enough. And this needs to be longer, so, you know, like we talked about earlier, making it longer than you'll need. So I'm going to make it 50 seconds. That's way longer than I'll need. It'll be fine. I can now take all of these, so bounce, impact, squash, and stretch, drag them down into my timeline. And if I want them to all be one after the other, right, I can just come to putting these in order. So impact, then bounce, and squash and stretch. If I select the top one, hold down shift and go down to the bottom one. I can right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers. I don't need any overlapping, but if I do add overlapping, it'll do a fade in and out at the beginning of each layer to transition between them, but I don't need that. So I'm going to hit OK, and now they're all one after the other. One, now the next one, now the next one, right? But I need a little bit of time at the beginning here for my, you know, intro title. So maybe, let's say, give myself a second and a half, right? So let's go 112, grab all 3 of these keyframes, drag it to the right. If I hold down shift, it'll snap me to where my timeline is there. So all good there. And I'm going to just take so if I don't see, just in case this happens to you, right? If you are like this and you come back to one of your compositions and you see, oh my gosh, there's nothing there, why can't I see anything? You just need to click right here on the time ruler, right, and just drag a little to get your playhead there, and then you'll be able to see what's going on. So I'm going to take my impact from earlier and come back to my motion design and paste that there. and then rename it, right? So this is motion design. I can't remember what I named it. Let's see, principles of motion design principles, right? There we go, good enough. So motion, enter, design, enter, principles. Now the thing is that this word is much bigger than what is there, so I'm going to shrink it down until it almost lines up with the beginning and end of that. So maybe 103, yeah, something like that. And then I want to make it bigger, so I'm going to take this anchor point, drag it down there, and I'm going to scale this, but I want to make sure it scales proportionally. I do not want any stretching like this, so shift, right, to make sure my text always scales proportionally. And that looks good. That way everything kind of starts at the top there. And then I'm going to hold down shift, and a shortcut key that will help you is alt square bracket, but the right square bracket, right? So that'll cut that off right there. And if not, you just hover over the end and do that. Holding down shift will snap you to your playhead, all that stuff. So now I got that. That's only there for that point. Then we switch to our impact. Then we're done with that, switch to our bounce. Once that's done, switch to squash and stretch. Nice. Okay, cool. Now this does look kind of boring. So, and we don't have a background. If I turn on this transparency grid, we can see there's nothing back there. Whatever's going to show back there is not of my choosing once it's rendered. It's just going to be whatever is on their desktop, however it reacts. So I want to make sure what is back there is what I want it to be, right? So I'm going to turn that back off so I can just see what I'm working on. And I create a new solid. This will just make a shape. I guess it's a type of layer that will fill up the back of my composition. So new solid, I'm gonna choose a dark gray. This is just my personal thing. You can make it any color you want it to. Let's say, you know, blue, right? Doesn't matter. Anything. Hit OK. Bring it down. Now in my case, right, all of my balls are blue, so that doesn't work for me. So if I want to change the color of that, right, Control Shift Y will let me adjust the settings of that. Now I can hit OK, OK. All right. Now to add that dark shadowing all the way around the edge, you could use a gradient ramp, set it to radial. You could instead make a shape. So if I come over here to the rectangle tool, and if I double click it, let's see, I want to make sure I have no layer selected. If I double click it, it'll create a shape layer that covers the whole comp, and I could fill that with a gradient, right, and then adjust that. That's definitely possible, but I don't want to do that either. What I want to do is I want to use an effect called vignette. I'm sure you've heard of it. So CC vignette will just add a dark tint all the way around, and the amount is how far will it go, and the angle of view is, I think, has to do with like the sharpness of the change a little bit, I guess. I don't know. I just play with both of these values until it looks kind of like I want it to. I don't touch these. But yeah, so that's pretty much that for setting up the main composition. Now next, I'm going to hold down Shift and snap to the end of this squash and stretch one. We learned earlier, N, Control Shift X. Now we got our comp trimmed to where it needs to be. We're going to move on to media encoder. So rendering this out, we're going to make sure in our project panel, what we have selected is the motion design composition and not any of the others. And then I can go up to composition, add to Adobe Media Render Queue. I think the other place is, there's another spot, file, export, add to media encoder queue. But that one's much more confusing. I just do it here, right? Composition, add to media encoder queue. And now we wait. I'm going to pause this for now while I wait for media encoder open. It can take a minute depending on your computer. All right, I'm back. And now that media encoder is open, something you'll notice is that, oh no, my composition isn't in here. And it is. It's just gonna take another minute for media encoder to finish talking to After Effects, so that it will send that composition over. There it is. Okay, cool. Now it sent it over, finally. So something to keep in mind is we gotta tell it what to be, right? So here we got our composition that we sent over. It's gonna be H.264, just leave that alone. But we usually format it to YouTube 1080, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and drag that over that way. And then, something I want to do is once I have that there, right, I've already used YouTube 1080 once, is I want to hit this plus right here, create new preset group, or not new preset group, but, well, I guess, yeah, let's call that. So my presets, right, whatever. And then I'm going to hit this plus here, create new preset, and create encoding preset because that's what this is. Give it a minute. There we go. And so new preset, I'm going to name it YouTube 1080. Because this should be the exact same values that were there, right? And then, at least I hope so. Oh, here we go. Based on YouTube 1080. So we'll come over there, YouTube 1080 Full HD. There we go. So that will at least save me on that. Now I know that all of these are the same as that, and then I'm going to hit OK. So that way, anytime I want to find that YouTube 1080 preset, I don't have to search for it anymore. It's just up here, right? If I don't want it in that preset group, I can just drag that up there and get rid of that. So there we go. User presets and groups, right? Whatever you want to do. Whatever the case may be, that's there, that's there. You need a smaller version of this as well, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to then go to YouTube 480 SD, not wide. And I don't want to drag it over that. I want to drag it either over this word or under this word, either or. So that way I get two encodings, right? It'll give me a stack instead of just one. I can stop hiding that or stop searching for that. Over here, I want to double click on this. We're going to go to creating our Slack version of this. Just got to give it a minute to open the settings. Once this is open, just needs a minute. There we go. I'm going to turn off export audio because this in particular doesn't have any audio. And then I'm going to, right here in the middle, we have an area that has a scroll bar here. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom where it says target bitrate here. And so we have estimated file size 13 megabytes. I want to turn it down until the estimated file size is about, 4 megabytes should be fine. And I'm going to hit OK. And then I believe once this is done, I can right click on this. Can I do that? Let's see, custom. Can I save the preset in here? Yep, there we go. Okay, so once I've changed all my settings, right, and I want to be able to use these settings over and over again, in this window right here, there's a save preset button, and I probably want to name this Slack no audio, right? So that way I know when I export it, it's not going to have any audio. So if I do want it to have audio, I want to make sure that, I come into these settings and check that on, hit OK. And then OK. And now over here in my user presets and groups, I have a Slack no audio preset that I can drag on to my composition whenever I need it and not have to go in there and change it anymore, right? All right. So something to keep in mind is now the output file, right? This little thing right here, if I select this, this will tell me where do you want to save it to, right? So maybe 184, and then it'll be named the same thing there. And then, for example, this one, it's just _1, so I might want to name it Slack, right? Save. All right, that's good. And now I just need to hit this Start Queue button here, this green play button, and it will begin rendering both versions of the MP4 that I told it to render out. There we go. And I can see it doing it down here. So it's getting this first one done. And it needs a minute. Let's see. Is it paused? There we go. Okay. Done. There we go. Okay, cool. All right, all done. And from there, if for some reason, oh, you can't remember where you saved it to or what folder you put it in, as long as you have Media Encoder still open, you can come over, right click, reveal in output file. Sorry, reveal output file. The media browser is this over here. So reveal output file will show you where in your files it is. In my case, I didn't move this one, right? So maybe moving that over, and now they're both right here, right? Okay, so hopefully I covered everything I wanted to cover. If there's any questions you have or any feedback you might have for me on this, that you think I could have explained better, or something that I did well in this, or whatever, or if this even helped you or not, please let me know, so that way I can know if I should continue making tutorial videos for the assignments or not. Have a beautiful day.